I am completely rewatching Stranger Things, and I've never really done a rewatch. I usually just watch the seasons as they would come out, but I'm rewatching it completely. And I just finished season two, and I have a lot of thoughts about seasons one and two. Going into this rewatch, the way that I would rank these seasons is like one, three, four, two. As of right now, it's one is still at the top, two is probably still going to be at the bottom, but I'm very curious to see where it's going to be after rewatching these with a fresh mind. But anyway, overall, like I think that season one just genuinely is like one of the best seasons of television of all time. It's easily like a 10 out of 10 for me. It's just a perfect season of television. And recently I've been watching like a lot of like 80s classics, like movies like The Goonies and E.T. And I was realizing that like movies now and like movies that are like family movies, like just movies in general just don't have that magic anymore that movies like The Goonies and E.T. had. But Stranger Things season one captures that magic in such a beautiful way while still having like the elevated aspects of like the horror elements and the gore and the violence, while also having that incredible, like pure-hearted joy and magic that those like old 80s projects had. And that's one of the super like special things about that season and why it's probably going to remain to be my favorite throughout this entire rewatch. And while watching season one, it's very clear to me that my favorite character in season one is Joyce by a country mile. Joyce in season one is just like the best representation of a mother in fiction, probably of all time, in my opinion. Like Joyce Byers is up there with like Elastigirl and like Kala from Tarzan and like even like Lorelai Gilmore from Gilmore Girls. Those are like top like S tier moms in fiction, in my opinion. Like Joyce is just the heart and soul of the whole season, and anytime she is just like, "I want to find my boy," you can just feel the hurt and the love that she has for her son in that moment, and it's just so beautiful. And this show also just has some of the best child acting you'll ever see in a show, and I just absolutely love these characters, and you just fall in love with them from the moment that you meet them. And there's no question why the show became an absolute success, and these kids just became like absolute bona fide superstars. There's not much I can say about season one that hasn't already been said. It's just so just perfect. But now on to season two. It is definitely worse, and it's a little bit of a step down, but it is still excellent. But it's not even that big of a drop. Like season one is a 10 out of 10. Season two is still like an 8 out of 10. And it has some of the best like additions to the show in the entire series in this show in this season with Max and with Bob and with Murray. Max is one of my favorite characters in the entire series because of how much I love her character in season four. I'm so excited to watch that again because she's definitely my favorite character that season. But I love her introduction. I love her like getting to know these characters, these boys, becoming friends with these boys, and her dynamic with Lucas. And Bob is just, oh, he's just so likable. Like Sean Astin has just never played an unlikable character. He is just like pure joy in this show as Bob Newby. And now I just can't hear the term Bob Newby superhero without just getting absolute chills. I love his character so much, and I really wish you could have seen more of him, but he served his purpose and he had the very, very brutal unaliving. I wish it wasn't as brutal. That was probably one reason why it's a little notched down for me. I think the way that he is unalive is a little too brutal for my liking for how great of a character he was and like his heroic sacrifice, but still served his purpose the way that it was, and he's just a phenomenal character. And I had completely forgotten that Murray was in this season. For some reason, I just completely thought that he was a brand new character in season three. I completely forgot he was in this show, and his character is great, and we get to see him more and more. Now that kind of brings me to like the Steve, Jonathan, and Nancy love triangle. I think in season one it wasn't that bad. Steve is kind of a dick, but it's not too bad. And then Jonathan is like a little bit of a creeper, but Nancy still sees the good in him. And I like this love triangle. And I think that there are moments like Steve and Nancy's moments, like it all just kind of works perfectly into Nancy and Jonathan's moments with that incredible moment overnight where they like meet each other at the door. Like that's a phenomenal moment between those two characters. And I was recently watching the latest episode of the Escape Pod. Andrew has the exact same thought that I have with this like love triangle. Is that I'm pretty sure that at the end of this season, it's going to be a thing where Nancy just chooses neither of them. I don't think either of them are perfect for her. They both have their pros and cons, and I think it's just going to be another thing where it's kind of a running bit. Which one is she going to pick? And it's just going to be she doesn't end up with either of them. But that also brings me into this is the season where we get so much of Steve and Dustin's friendship, which is probably the best duo in the entire series. Like Dustin isn't my particular favorite character in a particular season, but he's probably my favorite character in the entire series. And his dynamic with Steve is so good. Like the amount of that Dustin was just cussing in this season is so funny to me too. But season two does have the lost sister storyline. Like everything with Eleven finding her mother, I thought was very good. But everything with the sister stuff is not terrible. It just doesn't fit. It just feels so disconnected. And this was another point that Andrew recently made that if it was not just a standalone episode and it was an episode where Eleven was doing this stuff, with her siblings or with her sister or whatever, and then they had interconnecting with all the other stuff going on, maybe we wouldn't hate on the episode so much. But the fact that they made that choice and those characters are just like so very unlikable makes it such a hard watch. But season two does have one of my favorite sequences in the entire series, and that's the final like snowball dance at the end of season two. Like it is just absolute perfection, start to finish, with every single moment. And like even watching it, you could feel like the anxiety of like being transported back into middle school, of like going to a dance where you're not really sure what to expect, but there's so much like anticipation and anxiety with it. You can even feel it as Dustin is walking into this dance. And that is just so masterfully like done. That's just a masterclass in like filmmaking, and it's so beautiful. Every moment is great. Every like one of the four boys gets to have their time to shine. And then it gets the incredible payoff of 11 walking into the dance and then walking in her locking eyes with Mike, having her moment with Mike. It was just so beautiful. It really sucks having them be like that's one another bad thing about this. Not really a bad thing, but a thing that kind of sucks about season two is that Mike and 11 are split up. And it really sucks. And they both feel the distance. And you can feel how sad they are to not be with their person. But once they finally, reunite, is when the show starts cooking. And that's why those last few episodes are so good. But overall, season one and two are just an absolute blast. I love this show so much. I'm just having such a revitalized love of this show, just coming back and during this rewatch, and everyone just talking about Stranger Things and loving on Stranger Things. I'm so excited to start watching season three. I'm going to start watching it right now. And I'm now on season three. There's already so much that I've already forgotten about. I'm only 2 episodes in, but I want to talk about the stuff that I knew and remembered going into it. So I remembered some like the bigger stuff, like the Steve, Robin, and Dustin storyline, and like the Scoops Ahoy costumes. I remember the final battle. I remember the Hopper, Joyce, and Murray storyline. I remember there being like some kind of hallway altercation, and I remember the 80s vibes being off the charts. And I remember specifically the moment that Elle dumps Mike, the I dump your ass moment. But outside of that, there was so much that was like my memory was just jogging as I was rewatching the show. I can't believe I forgot so much. When I was watching season three for the first time, I must have just been watching everything in the moment, but not retaining anything. The first thing that I want to say off the bat about season three is that we're only like 2 episodes in. I just started episode three, and the show was already just like so much funnier, but also so much scarier. Sequences are much scarier. There's like actually a lot of really good jump scares, and like Hopper is just hilarious. There's just a lot more comedy, and it's just overall much funnier season already. And obviously in this season we get to see a better look of like Mike and Elle actually being in a relationship now. And in episode one, they're just absolutely adorable. Obviously, it does suck that like they do kind of blow off their friends a little bit more, but Lucas is very hypocritical here, because if Max had like the same limitations that 11 had, where she can't be outside for very long, he would be doing the exact same thing. And another thing that I just absolutely love about this show is that in the first few episodes, they're just really laying the groundwork for this new crazy thing that's happening. And they're doing that in these subtle ways with the way that the Upside Down is affecting the environment of Hawkins. Like in season two, that was with the vines and the pumpkins being like destroyed and poison and all that. Now in season three, it's the rats and it's the magnets. Like this whole magnet storyline came back in my head like the moment very early in episode one where the magnets fall off the fridge in Joyce's kitchen, and she picks up the photo, the drawing of Bob Newby superhero, which was the moment where they just want to be like, oh, here's the Bob Newby stuff, to take you away from the fact that all the magnets are on the ground. Make sure you're not paying attention to that yet, which is just like masterful storytelling, obviously. And I completely forgot there's even a Bob Newby whole flashback sequence in this, and like I just love Sean Astin as Bob Newby. It was just such a pleasant surprise, and it really just sucks for Will, because poor Will just wants to play D&D, but he was like for like the last year basically he was either in the Upside Down or he was basically possessed. So he is so very behind, and he can feel it now because he just wants to play D&D. And all these guys grew up while he was either in the Upside Down or just very sick for being possessed. And that really sucks. But it's also a way of showing that when people are like behind developmentally as kids are getting older, that kids are going to start being like alienated from their friends because their interests aren't lining up anymore. And that kind of brings me to the end of episode one, the start of episode two, where Mike starts lying to Elle because Hopper basically threatened him. And I remember like my opinion of Mike just kind of weighing, going further down each season. But for my like recollection of season three, I just remember Mike kind of being a dick. But I didn't remember the fact that it's basically because Hopper is threatening him to not spend so much time with Elle. Granted, he is still like very whiny and annoying after that, but it still is just not him being a dick just because like that's just who he is. He just feels forced to have to do that. Like Mike's character really just meets its peak in season one because he's the main character and we get to see all of his aspects in his relationship with people. But it just kind of goes down in each season because his roles just get a little less important, and he just gets more like whiny and annoying the older he gets. And then there's the moment in episode 2 where Hopper asks Joyce to go to dinner with him at Enzo's. And that was a moment that also brought back another memory because I completely forgot about Hopper's ending this season, his whole thing with Joyce, and then the letter that he leaves for 11 at the end. Again, there's just so much that I forgot that I'm so looking forward to watching this again and experiencing these moments again for the first time in a very long time. And we also get the moment, the iconic moment that's now like kind of its own meme on TikTok, the moment where Dustin and Steve meet up at Scoops Ahoy. They're starting to like, crack the code already, but their relationship is just so good. They're clearly the best duo of the series. And freaking Carrie Elvis, Dr. Lawrence Gordon, he's a doctor.
I'm a doctor.
I don't remember him being in this show at all. That was just another pleasant surprise. I definitely remember watching this in 2019 and just seeing that this guy's the mayor and not batting an eye at who's playing it. It's crazy that they got Carrie Ellis for this role, but it's a great casting. And then we also, in episode 2, got the 11 and Max shopping montage, which is just so perfect. I love the 80s style. 11's like black and multicolored, like romper, whatever you want to call that, is so iconic, and I love that look for her. And their shopping montage is just so cute, very much 80s vibes and like 80s style. The only thing was like when they were doing the photo shoot, I don't picture a girl like 11 making those kind of poses. Like those were very much like celebrity faces and poses that Millie Bobby Brown was making in those moments. That just kind of took me out of it a little bit, but they were just very clearly having fun. And then that leads to the I dump your ass moment at the end of the episode. Like 11 is just trying to like learn how to be a person. And Max is being like a person that's trying to guide her a little bit. And Max and Lucas even said that Max and Lucas have broken up like 5 different times. So of course that's going to be something that happens, but obviously they're going to reconcile eventually. And I think it all just kind of makes sense for 11 trying to figure out who she wants to be. Last night I finished my first ever rewatch of Stranger Things season 3. First time rewatching it since I first watched it in 2019. The season is jam-packed with a whole lot of stuff that I want to talk about, so let's just dive into some of my favorite things about the show and some things that maybe I didn't love that much. I do want to start with like my general consensus of this season as a whole. I went into this rewatch kind of seeing season 3 kind of as like the 1B to season 1's 1A. But now after having rewatched season 1, season 2, and season 3 within the last few weeks, I can say that season 3 is pretty clearly at the number 2 spot, but it's really close. I think season 1's perfect, it's a 10 out of 10. Season 2 it's still good, it's just not perfect, it's like an 8 out of 10. And season 3 is like a 9 or a 9.5. And there's like one glaring reason that I realize why I don't really like it as much, and it's this whole aspect of including the Russians. For some reason in my head, the inclusion of Russians and like the Russian military almost feels like it's the show jumping the shark in a way. Like it's going too big and too grand. Like I loved how it was just crazy stuff going on in Hawkins in season 1 and season 2. And I'm also fully aware that when I rewatch season 4, it's going to get even crazier because of all this stuff with Hopper and Russia. But also overall, it's just almost impossible to compare season 1 and season 3 because they're so vastly different. The scale of season 3 is a million times bigger, and even like the colors and the way that it looks is just so much different and like almost more like clean and like so much more like polished looking, but it almost like loses the charm of season 1 in that way by having that. But again, it all still makes sense for the season. The season is still phenomenal. It's still a 9 or a 9.5 with a lot of incredible stuff. But again, there's just some aspects to it, especially with all this Russian stuff, that I'm just not a huge fan of after rewatch. And another thing that was kind of surprising to me during this rewatch is that I think my favorite character of this season was Robin. She just fits in perfectly. She's already like a huge asset right out the gate, and she's funny. She's just incredible on screen. She's just so like joyous and fun also. And her dynamic with Steve is almost as like at the caliber of him with Dustin. Like that was just such a pleasant surprise how much I love the character on rewatch. I'll be curious to see how much I like her in season 4 because I know that for a fact going into season 4, my favorite character in season 4 was Max. So we'll see if like my love for her now during this rewatch, maybe that changes watching season 4. But as I was doing this rewatch, I was taking notes as I was going through each episode, just like take little notes of things that I found like interesting or I wanted to point out during my rewatch. One thing I really want to point out is how much I forgot about how crazy this mind flayer stuff is. And like the fleshy and all this crazy stuff going on. It was so insane. I forgot about all that stuff. And one that's really coming to mind is the moment where, Max and 11 track Billy and Heather down to Heather's parents' house. Then they leave and then they attack the parents. But I also love the reveal that Heather's dad is one of the assholes that Nancy works with at the newspaper. Because in that moment, instead of just being like a random no-name who we're like, oh, that person did nothing wrong, we get to look at him and be like, oh, this guy kind of actually deserves this crazy stuff that's happening to him. And it was pretty satisfactory getting to see Jonathan and Nancy go head to head with him at the hospital too. But then that kind of brings me to episode 4. And as I was starting that episode, I realized what was happening, what was going to happen in the episode. I realized just like how incredible episode 4 are in season 3 and season 4. Like season 4 episode 4 is one of my favorite episodes in the entire series because that's one of my favorite moments in the entire series, the running up that hill moment with Max. I can't wait to rewatch that. I'm so excited for that. But episode 3 has like it has the sauna sequence and then the big battle with Eleven and Billy, and then even like the stuff leading up to it, like the Dustin, Steve, and Robin storyline is still fun, and then we even have like the whole sequence where Will is basically breaking down what is going on, and they have their theories, and the way like the show is edited is just so perfect too. It has like so many great like transitions. It has like so many fun editing choices that keeps you engaged, and like it's just they just cook it. It's just so fun. The show is so incredible. And then I had this thought, like as like we were halfway through this season, like Joyce and Hopper on their own little side mission, which I wasn't a huge fan of, like their motivation and like what they were actually doing, because like Joyce's whole thing is just protecting her boy. I guess that this whole thing is a way of her protecting her son in the future and trying to prevent future stuff, but still, like her as a detective, she's a good detective, but just going from like protective mom to basically like professional detective was a little weird to me. But anyway, besides the point, it was so funny to me. I just made the connection, like there's all these kids who are just running around without their parents. Who is feeding them? How are they eating things? How are they can't pay for anything. Mike said when he was shopping the other day they had like $3. How are they surviving right now? They're probably just like all shacking up in Mike's house and just stealing all their food. But it was just so funny how there were just these kids and parents just so isolated from each other. It's like how's everyone alive? I don't understand how everyone is just there's these like 13-year-old kids that are just running around with no parent supervision. But also, as we get to like the halfway point of the show, as like the adventure aspects start coming out, it's more like adventure and like mystery solving at this point. Not as many horror elements. They lean very heavily into the horror elements early on to introduce you to the mind flayer and all this crazy stuff going on. And then they're in the middle where it's just like action, adventure, and fun. And then it leads way back into the horror elements again to finish the show. And I found that very interesting. There's just like so much going on that they can like pick and choose which kind of genre they want to focus on for the episode, which I thought was really fun. And I don't think there's any other show that can really do that and do it well. And then this is also like I realized like when we were watching like that sequence I mentioned earlier with Jonathan and Nancy kind of teaming up against the assholes from the paper who are now like mind flayer people, and then like the mini mind flayer from the hospital. Like they are just a great duo overall. I just still am not so like fully convinced that they should be a couple and end up like being together forever. And then I also made a note. There was this really funny cut where I think it was Hopper talking with Alexi and how he was just like, this thing is like, this place is impossible to break into. It is impossible to get in. And then they just immediately cut to Dustin and Erica, two literal children who found a way to break in, basically by accident, but they found a way to break into this impossible place that people can't get into. But also with this season, I really like the fact that we finally get to see Elle take some damage. Like not just from using her powers, like this mind flare was so much of a threat that Elle is finally not just the one size fits all perfect solution for anything that has to do with the upside down. Like it was about time. Like she can't be just going like this and then that's the automatic solution. I like getting to see her struggle in this season. And this whole story arc with her might make her another one of my favorite characters this season. She's probably my top three. It might be like Robin, Hopper, 11 are my favorite characters from this season. But then as we get to the final two episodes of the season, that is the moment where all of these crazy, complex storylines with all of these characters finally converge. And then specifically that moment where Elle gets that little mini piece of the mind flare out of her skin, and then Hopper comes in and squishes it with his boot. Insane moment. When it happened, I knew I was just gonna be feeling absolute chills. I love that show. I love that sequence so much, and I love how the show does these incredible, insane sequences, but they always find a way to come together at the end to finish the job. And I'm just like looking over my notes right now for episode 8. Like this episode is so stacked. It's one of the best like episodes start to finish of the series by far. It has Hopper's entrance into Starkheart Mall. It has Steve's clutch hit with the car. It has the never-ending story. It has the fireworks fight in the mall. It has Hopper's apparent death in the moment, and then it has just the gut-wrenching ending of like Elle having to move away with Will and the Byers, and then Elle reading Hopper's note. It is just start to finish perfection, and is a reason why this show is so good and why this is one of the top tier seasons of the series. But again, no matter how incredible this season was, it doesn't capture that magic for me the way that season 1 does. But it really is just the fact that these seasons are so very great, but also so very different. So it's up to whatever your taste is to whether you'll consider to be the best one. I just don't think anything is ever going to be able to dethrone season one for me. But now I've started at episode one of season four, and I'm now in season four. Season four is an absolute mammoth of a season. I'm already halfway through, and I have so many thoughts because I've already watched like 5 hours of content. First thing I want to point out is that usually Stranger Things, throughout as the seasons have gone on, is usually very good at adding new characters that are like really pushing the story along and actually like feel like they belong in the story. And in this season, we have a very good additional protagonist with Eddie Munson, and then we have a really good additional like antagonistic figure with the Angela character, which I'll get to in a minute. But then we also have the character of Argyle, who I just really don't really like. I don't really like the choice of making Jonathan a pothead and then this guy feeding in him being a pothead. And so far, from I don't really remember anything else, but from what I've watched so far, the only purpose of having Argyle in the show is so that they have access to a car after Eleven gets taken away. And that just didn't feel like a valid enough excuse to include a character like Argyle. I'm just really not a fan of him so far. And he is so far like knocking the show a point for me because I just find him so incredibly unnecessary. And in my previous video, after rewatching season three, I realized how much I didn't like the Russia stuff, and I knew I was gonna like it this season even less because of how they really lean into the Russia. You literally need to go to Russia now to break Hopper out of prison, which again, I'm still not really a big fan of this fact. Like the Russia stuff is genuinely another thing that's like knocking the show a point for me right now. And I'm also realizing that like when Joyce has a storyline that doesn't gravitate around Will, I'm just not as big of a fan of that. I can understand that she's a woman and not every single storyline needs to be directed around her son and her children, but that was one of the things I love so much about Joyce is that she's just such a ride or die mom. And then in season three and season four, she's not with Will at all. And she doesn't even seem really concerned about what's going on with Will either, because she's just trying to break out Hopper, which I can understand. She's a very loyal person and wants to get Hopper safe. But that aspect of not really caring about Will or like worrying about Will's safety as much does, again, it just doesn't feel very Joyce to me. But outside some overarching thoughts, let's talk about episode one. Episode one was really the episode where I started to remember so much stuff that I had already forgotten. Like one of the most prolific things about season four and why it was so popular is because of TikTok. And because of Eddie's popularity on TikTok and because of like the Chrissy wake up and other really trending things on TikTok really is what launched season four into like a whole new stratosphere of like popularity. So like when I first saw Chrissy on screen, and then it made me remember like the Chrissy wake up song, and then I even saw the moment where Eddie was trying to wake up Chrissy that spawned that song. So that was all fun to see again. But one secret from season one I really want to talk about that I really love was the back and forth of like the final like moments of the D&D campaign and the basketball game. That was really like edited in a very perfect way in my opinion because it kept going back and forth between moments that were going the way the Hawkins basketball team as there were things going away for like Dustin and their campaign, and then there were things that are going against them back and forth, and then it ends with both Sinclair kids hitting the game-winning shot essentially. I'm also just a huge basketball fan, so seeing like the retro vibes of the basketball court, the jerseys, and even like the warm-ups was all very awesome to see. And then this is the first time we hear the clock, the iconic like clock dinging noise that represents like Vecna coming into this person's mind. And the second I heard that, I got chills and was me like, oh yeah, I completely forgot about this. Let's go. It's game time. And as we get into season two, this now brings me more to like the Angela stuff. And I think I can throw my vote out there for my least favorite Stranger Things character, and the one I hate the most is definitely Angela. I understand that middle schoolers are assholes, but at the point of where you're just making fun of someone for having a dead dad, it's just truly like unforgivable. And I wish Eleven beat her with that roller skate some more. I remember saying in my head after the cop said to Eleven, you gave her a grade 2 concussion, right? And I'm like, good. I wish she gave her a grade 3. Angela and her goons absolutely suck. I hate her more than anybody in the Upside Down or anybody in Russia. But what I'm noticing again, as I mentioned in my last video, Robin was my favorite character in season 3, and she is still continuing to be the best character in the show. She's also just continuing to be one of the best detectives in the entire show. She's the one who like was able to find like the family video like Rolodex to find Reefer Rick, and she was able to have her monologue to be able to get them in with Victor Creel. She is the real MVP of season 3 and season 4. And it was also really great to see her and Nancy. I think their dynamic together was actually really good, and I liked how they started out with Robin being a little bit like too much for Nancy, and Nancy not really digging her vibe. But now they're starting to really mesh and become good friends, and I really like that duo. And now as we get into season 3, there's not really much I want to talk about for season 3, but I do want to mention I remember hearing the name Yuri and not really remembering what that was about. And then when he was revealed, and I remember seeing and we're starting to see more about his character, and I think this character sucks. But episode 3 ends with Max really starting to put two and two together about what's going on with her headaches and that she really feels like she's next. And that whole sequence of her like putting all those pieces together, I thought was just masterful. But then that obviously goes into episode 4. Before I get into my favorite thing, probably of all Stranger Things, I completely forgot Robert Englund was in this. And he was awesome as Victor Creel. He was very haunting in the way he was telling his story and like the closed eyes and everything. I thought it was just brilliant. But now, obviously, episode 4 has the running up that hill moment. Literally, I think it's my favorite moment in all of Stranger Things. Like the way that Kate Bush was edited into into that sequence, and then all of like the flashbacks or all of Max's memories that helped her like break out of Vecna and all of that was just so beautiful. It almost just moved me to tears. And I remember Max going into this season being my favorite character mainly because of this sequence. But as of right now, I wouldn't say she's my favorite, even though the scene and sequence carries a whole lot, and then we'll see if she gets like more of a role throughout the rest of the season. But I'm honestly not sure who I would say my favorite character is. I think is up there. I think Robin is still up there. And now I recently started episode 5 a few days ago also, as we're getting into the backstory of 11 and 1. And I'm so excited to dive more into that because I still don't remember a whole lot of it. But I'm so excited to experience it once again. Can't wait to watch the rest of season 4 going into season 5. I just finished my complete rewatch of everything Stranger Things, all 4 seasons this past weekend by watching the last 5 episodes of season 4. So let's talk about everything from the great, the good, and the not so good as we get into season 5 this week. Before I get into the specifics of season 4, I really want to talk about how I think this season stacks up with the rest. Going into this rewatch, I had the seasons ranked from top to bottom 1, 3, 4, 2, and I think my ranking is staying that way. There have been some points where I thought that I could switch 4 and 2, but the end all be all of these seasons is that season 4 is just bigger, grander, has the bigger moments, and season 2 is just the most forgettable season out of all 4 seasons, in my opinion. The way that something really sticks with me is something that could really make a show like stand out a little bit more for me, and that is the way that season 4 is for me. And that's why I almost thought it was going to be better than season 3, even, but I'm still going to stick with the 1, 3, 4, 2. But in terms of like ranking season 4 out of 10, I still give it the same score I gave it season 2. I give it an 8 out of 10. And it gets those 2 notches down for it because there were 2 storylines that I really just thought were actually kind of dumb. But there's just so much other incredible stuff that makes up for it. But the 2 things I thought were actually kind of like dumb storylines, even though they had good payoffs, was Yuri, Murray, and Joyce, that whole dumb storyline in Russia, and then the Mike, Will, Jonathan, Argyle storyline. Like any storyline with Joyce just doesn't feel the same or have the same amount of heart if Will is not involved and it's like a central point of what is motivating her. Like it literally just went from her just looking at Christmas lights in her house trying to talk with her boy in the upside down to literally doing reconnaissance missions and like holding a gun to a dude's head in Russia. Like how did we get here? I can say though that this storyline with Joyce and Murray does have an incredible payoff with Joyce and Hopper's reunion, with 11 and Hopper's reunion at the end of the season. So those moments alone almost warrant this crappy storyline just for it to have that kind of a payoff. But then there's also the Jonathan, Will, and Mike storyline with Argyle. Argyle, again, I mentioned in my first video talking about season 4, he's just too annoying and like not funny at all. His whole purpose is the fact that he has a car. That's basically all he has, and then he gets them into the surfer dudes pizza place or whatever so they can use that so 11 can get into her like mental state there. Other than that, I didn't think he served really many purposes at all, and his point of being in the show was kind of pointless. And kind of going back to Hopper for a second, as I was watching like the points getting into like that fight with the Demogorgon, I was realizing that they basically just made David Harbour like a Jason Statham type character. He went from being like a great detective as a like small town sheriff in a small town into being just this action hero basically. It's just another thing where like this whole thing where they go into Russia and making the show too like big going into Russia makes things too big for this thing that was such like a small contained story, and that's one of the things that just kind of bugs me about season 4 and season 3. But even though there are those storylines, there is still so much good, and I think that this season has potentially the best storyline in the entire show because it has the storyline with Max, Lucas, Dustin, Steve, Nancy, Robin, Erica, all like that big ensemble group with them trying to like put the pieces together the upside down and even helping Eddie being a part of that too. Like that's one of the best storylines in the entire series, and it was all contained in Hawkins and the Upside Down. Like we get to see Steve's dynamic with Dustin, which is still kind of like an old married couple bickering all the time, which I think is so funny, such a great creative choice. We get to see Dustin and Eddie. We get to see Nancy and Steve. We get to see Nancy and Robin. We get to see Steve and Robin. So many great dynamics, and then even Max and Lucas's relationship. It's so many great dynamics in a big group of people, and it's so perfect, and they're all just working together for this common cause. And then there's that moment at the end of episode 6 where Steve is being attacked by the demo bats. And it's frankly bizarre that Steve survived season 4. With the way he was talking to Nancy about how he had like his whole life planned out with her being a part of it, and like just basically putting everything on the table, and then him getting attacked by the bats, and then basically being choked out for like 40 minutes throughout all this stuff going on in the finale. It's insane that Steve survived. I think they probably should have unalived Steven this season. Like with the way they were talking, I don't really know what else he has to do in this season 5. I know he's most likely going to have some kind of sacrificial moment for Dustin or for Nancy, but I feel like it would have been like meant a little bit more if it was this season. And this might be a hot take. I think they should have unalived Steve instead of Eddie. I think it would have been so fascinating if we had a literal like court case storyline in season 5 of trying to prove Eddie's innocence. But that doesn't mean that I'm not anticipating Steve dying in season 5. And I'm also frankly terrified because when I was rewatching that scene with him in the demo bats, I was like, watching him be unalive on screen is going to be so tough. Anyone who dies in the season is going to be so hard to watch. And another thing about season 4 is that like it has so much stuff going on, and one of the best episodes is episode 7 because it has the Steven, all those guys in the upside down. He has the 11-1 face-off moment. It has Hopper and Russia going up against the Demogorgon, which no matter how much I don't like the Russia storyline, the stuff with Hopper facing off against the Demogorgons was all pretty awesome, and like the snowy environment too was just so awesome. And then again, that episode has this conversation with Eddie and Steve where Eddie is talking to Steve about how much Dustin adores him. And then Steve just ends up surviving. They're just putting all the pieces together where it would have been perfect for Steve to have a heroic sacrifice. And then he ends up living. Like, it would have been great if there was a moment at the end. I'm jumping ahead a little bit to the finale where it's Robin, Nancy, and Steve going up against Vecna. And then Nancy has the shotgun. Robin and Steve have the Molotov cocktails. And there could have been a moment where the shotgun wasn't working and Vecna was going for Nancy. Steve could have jumped in the way, pushed him off that ledge while he's on fire, and that could have been a heroic sacrifice to save Nancy in that moment. I am jumping around a lot because there's so much more I want to talk about, but let's just keep going, try to keep up. And another thing that was really awesome, again, with the best storyline in the season, was when they figured out they can communicate through lights as Robin, Nancy, Eddie, and Steve are in the Upside Down. And then they get the light bright out. That is just genius, and it's showing why Dustin is my favorite character in this season. He is just the glue that holds everyone together, and he is the brains that is making everything move the way it should be. But then obviously that episode also has the incredible reveal of Vecna being 11, the incredible like transition showing Vecna and then having those 001 tattoo on him. My gosh, what an incredible twist. And again, it's one of those things that's like a 13 out of 10 that's compensating for like the 2 out of 10 and the 4 out of 10s. I also just really want to point out that I think that the second most badass character in the entire series out of like the main cast ensemble is Nancy, because I just love that they took this like small town like popular girl and then transformed her into being this like gun-toting badass, and she is just so awesome. Every single time there's like a main battle, big build up, she's always the one who is just like has like the best one-liners and is just ready to do whatever it takes. I haven't talked much about 11 yet. 11 does have so many incredible moments. She has a moment with like facing off with Vecna, and she has the moment like against like when she gets her powers back, shooting all those people off of her with like the sparks in the background, and she has the helicopter scene, pulling down that helicopter. 11 is probably my second favorite character of the season, either second or third, because she is just insane badass, and her storyline of getting her powers back and finding out the source of Vecna and all of that was a very good storyline, probably my second favorite of the season. Now, another thing that kind of makes me upset about the season 4, specifically the finale, is that usually in the past seasons, there's always the moment where everyone comes together to have this final battle with whatever the big bad is. And in season 4, they essentially still do. They still have the same point that they're all trying to do. They're all trying to help, but they're all still so separate. Hopper and Joyce are in freaking Russia, and then there's the big storyline that's doing everything, and then there's 11 and Mike who have their old thing when they're in freaking California, where again they're all technically still coming together in a way, but not as a big unified front, all in one place, trying to put a plan together. And that made me just a little bit upset, even though they also had the same point in mind. And then we get through all the craziness, and now we're kind of at the end where everyone reunites after all the craziness. And this show has some of like the most like emotional hugs that I've ever seen in any kind of show. It's just showing how much everyone just truly loves each other, and you can just see it's like the actors are hugging. It's not even the characters, like the actors are hugging each other because they just have so much love for everyone who's a part of the show. And now another thought came to my head as I was watching this, and I was like, is it possible for a show to just have too many characters? It's kind of getting to a point where we are now going to 5 seasons, and we still have like 12 characters that were all from the first season, and none of them have been killed off throughout that time. That is kind of how the show just got too big. They just kept too many characters, and they're going to need to cut down a lot of them this season. But it sucks that it's going to be this is the last season. This is when they're finally going to do that. Like there should have been some moments where they like Hopper stayed dead or Steve died or something like that. There's just too many characters now, and that's why season 4 was just so big. They had to fit in so many storylines. But other than that, like season 4 is an absolute banger. Even though it's my third favorite out of the 4 seasons, it's still so incredible. There's not a bad season of Stranger Things. I'm so excited for season 5. I got some more videos incoming, but what are you excited to see in Stranger Things 5?